As the years started to pass, as I started to do my career, I almost started to lose faith in reading. I would read a book on relationships. Did my relationships improve? No. Read a book on marketing. Did my sales improve? No. Like I was just taking things in one ear and it was going out the other.
Tiago Forte is the best-selling author of Building a Second Brain, which teaches how to capture the important information in your life so you can use it later when you need it most.
Things like your health, things like your family, your house, your relationships. These are ongoing concerns that don't have a beginning and end.
In this episode of Real Relationships, Real Revenue, we'll talk about what to take notes on, how to do it, and what most people get wrong when it comes to digital notes.
They were doing it during the Renaissance. They were doing it during the Industrial Revolution. It's like every time humanity has gone through this key historical moment where the volume of information skyrocketed, they've, in a way, turned to the same solution.
And most importantly, we'll talk about how to match your note-taking practice with a style that fits the needs of your business development career.
You should choose your note-taking app, your second brain app, based on your thinking style, based on how your mind works.
So Tiago, hit us with the big idea. I think this is going to be new to a lot of people that this is even possible. Hit us with the big idea of what the superpower of building a second brain is.
You're probably a voracious consumer of information, and that can take any form or any combination of forms. Like you said, it could be many books you read, could be online articles, newspaper, magazine, it could be podcasts, YouTube videos, it could be online courses or seminars. It's like we have an embarrassment of riches in formats.
Yep.
But if you're someone who consumes a lot of information, you like to learn, you're curious, you have many interests, if any of that describes you, there was a time in my life where I read 50 books a year, like you. I was a voracious reader. And a lot of my identity was around that. A lot of my interests were around reading. As the years started to pass, as I started to do my career and have different experiences, I almost started to lose faith in reading and in a way, almost in learning, because I saw, I would read a book on relationships. Did my relationships improve? No. I would read a book on, marketing. Did my sales improve? No. Sometimes there'd be a small improvement, but there wasn't a strong correlation.
Step change. Yeah.
Exactly. Nowhere near a step change. It really felt like I was just taking things in one ear and it was going out the other and not really affecting anything. I just started trying different things and experimenting and researching and reading about that question itself. What did people in the past do with this problem of feeling like you're consuming things, but it's not leading anywhere? And I happened upon note-taking, and specifically this idea of a commonplace book, which actually goes back over 2,000 years. They were doing this in ancient Greek times. They were doing it in the Holy Roman Empire. They were doing it during the Enlightenment. They were doing it during the Renaissance. They were doing it during the Industrial Revolution. It's like every time humanity has gone through this key historical moment where the volume of information skyrocketed, they've, in a way, turned to the same solution, which is don't try to use your biological brain to take all that in, which is impossible. Use some kind of external medium. A second brain is really just that. It's a commonplace book, a timeless solution with a new manifestation.
The idea of this commonplace book 20, 30 years ago was 3x5 cards in a big card catalog that you could go access. But those aren't cross-linked. They don't sit in your pocket on your phone. They don't sync across all your devices. You can't easily put something in it. Now everything's easily accessible. Think of that high-end management consultant, that big-time lawyer, that account executive, huge healthcare company that's managing a $100 million a year relationship. Basically, they've got stuff everywhere. And they not only have things on the delivery of their work, which is around the kind of work they do. How do I conduct a deposition? How do I prepare for trial if I'm a lawyer? But what we teach is not the doing of the work, but the winning of the work. That alone needs a digital system.
Some of the key years that I was developing this, I was in consulting. I worked in
so you get it.
I totally get it. And in fact, this way of thinking is very consultant-like. I noticed the business model of consulting when I worked for this boutique French innovation consulting firm in their office in San Francisco. There's nothing more expensive or time consuming than learning something new, right? So we would enter a new field. Let's say at the time it was self-driving cars. So we're going to consult on self-driving cars. Well, we have to spend a stupendous amount of time and energy, not just reading things, but diving into research reports, compiling data. And then we would do that usually with one client that had already sort of hired us or sort of paid for that R&D. But once we had sold to that client, we could get that same expertise and sell it again and again and again and again. And we had to have a profitable business. It's like learn once, sell many times. That's the model that works because that R&D is expensive. And even if you have one client that paid for it, that's not going to give you the ROI on all that. You really need to sort of spread that R&D across many clients. As an individual in that business model, as a person, how does that work? How do you acquire that expertise and save it, preserve it in a form that you can access again and again and again without losing it? It's not just enough to be able to speak to the expertise in general. You need to know like the data point, the fact, the statistic, the reference. That's what you're paid for as a consultant, is to think. What I think most people don't realize, even many consultants don't realize, is you can think once, capture the value of that thinking, and capitalize on it again and again and again.
A lot of the audience members will comment like, gosh, how do you remember it was Michael Norton at Harvard that was led up the IKEA effect research? That's crazy. Well, it's because nobody sees it, but I have it all in a database on my computer that syncs with my phone and my iPad, and wherever I'm at, I can be getting ready for a speech and go, wasn't there something around self-disclosing information correlating to liking? And I can search on the right thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember who did that. Yeah, they were at Cornell. Okay, yeah. And then I can get ready for the speech and in just an instant, grab the information I want. But I will say this, before I read Building a Second Brain and started devouring Tiago's content, I had these in multiple places, and the friction of finding that example might take 10 or 12 minutes because I'm like, which Excel file or PowerPoint was that? And now it's all in one place. Everything's crystallized, instantly searchable, and it just has been a game changer for me.
I really wish more people understood the incredible power of what you just described. Many people say, oh, that makes sense for other people, but doesn't apply to me. You know, other people can document what they know and what they've done and what they've learned and produced and researched, and then turn them into these artifacts that you reference again and again on demand. But my work, it's too ambiguous. It changes too quickly. It's not something that can just be documented. But I'm here to tell you it's not true. I mean, I've talked to truck drivers that have benefited from knowledge management. I've talked to SEAL team soldiers. I've talked to a corporate pilot recently. There is not a profession that I've come across, whether it's traditional like consulting or knowledge work, all the way to the trades, manual things. Everything is information now. We are all knowledge workers in a sense.
So like one of the things I thought was, I don't remember if it was in the book or in a video or one of your ways of teaching, but one thing you said that was really profound to me that I had been doing it all wrong beforehand was when you capture things, put it where you'll need it versus where it came from. Do you remember that idea?
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit and then maybe describe the para structure? Because I think our audience seeing that will start to go, oh, I see how I could do this.
So para is really a solution to a specific problem, which is I have a bunch of stuff, but I don't know how to organize it. Most people don't need much guidance in saving things in the first place. We know how to download, clip, save, share, but then it's like, what do I do? What's next? How do I make sense of this? Really, this came from my personal discoveries to try to solve exactly that problem. And the key insight is that when it comes to large amounts of information, especially digital information, most people's model for note-taking comes from school. And that made sense in school because your studies are it's very clear. You have classes. Yeah. You know exactly what they are. Each of those classes has a schedule and a timeline, a beginning and an end. All the structure is there for you. So it makes sense to have a chemistry notebook, a math notebook, a history notebook, an English notebook. That makes zero sense once you leave school. And the reason is in the workplace, no one tells you what to take notes on. It's totally unclear what you should take notes on. It's unclear what they will be used for. There's no, test. There will be a test, but it won't be like a written test on the calendar, right?
Yeah.
There's no grade that you're getting. It's sort of this wide open, open-ended space. And so para instead says, instead of categories and subjects, organize according to what you can think of as different timescales. What will you need in the short term? Look at that stuff often. What will you need in the medium term? Look at that stuff a little less often. What will you need in the long term? Look at that stuff even less often. And what is someday maybe only if and when needed? And the kind of the amazing insight is that last category of you really never know if you'll ever need it is the vast majority of everything.
Yeah.
Probably 50, 60, 70% of all information is just sort of, oh, it's interesting. Maybe one day I'll do something with it. So why would you spend your precious time and attention on that 70%?
Yeah.
It actually turns out that first category of very near-term stuff, in my experience, is about 1%. If I look in my note-taking app, 1% of all my notes are in what are called actionable projects, active projects, which is that first category, which means I get to dedicate most of my attention and time and energy to only 1% of my notes, which makes basically the whole problem of information overload completely solvable.
This was a huge unlock for me. I fell in love with Evernote back, I don't know, whenever it first started, was 10 or 15 years ago. And it got so cluttered because I didn't know how to use it that I quit. So I still had some really valuable stuff in it from old book notes and things like where I crystallized the main message of a book for myself, things like that. But I actually quit looking at it because to me, metaphorically, it was just like a table with a massive pile of stuff just thrown on top of it. And it just bugged me that it wasn't in any kind of orderly fashion. So everybody, when we're saying para, as we think about shorter term to longer term, Tiago, I've never heard you describe it that way. I think it's brilliant. The first P is the para is projects, areas, resources, and archive. And like you said, the big unlock for me was, archive. We went on the vacation. These are all the notes of things. I don't need that again, but I want to save it. Put it in archive. It's there if I need it, but it's not clutter on the desk, on the table.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, audience, pay attention to this, because by having the short-term projects, areas, which Tiago, I want you to describe, resources and archive, and having that as your overall organizational structure, it is a major unlock. And it's what made this not only doable, but massively valuable to me. So Tiago, double click on each of those and tell the audience what should be in each one.
So projects are simply the time-bounded outcomes that you're trying to create right now. Time-bound outcomes. Okay. There's something you're trying to make happen. And this applies completely the same, whether it's in your professional life or your personal life, right? Let's start with personal. I'm in my home office right now, looking out the window to our house. Right now, there's a whole range of home projects that we have to do, right? Paint the cabinet doors, fix the alarm system, look into changing the HVAC filters. It's like projects are this universal layer.
Yep.
Whereas in the business, I have things like hire a community manager. I have things like file our 2022 taxes, things like plan the next staff retreat, right? And the key thing that makes a project is that there's a specific outcome you're trying to achieve. It's not just like, we'll see how it goes, whatever. No, you have like a goal. And time bound, I added that. I think that's important because it's not, we'll reach this goal whenever we feel like it or whenever we get, or when it doesn't matter. There's actually a time by which you prefer it to have been finished. Those two things are what define a project.
So when I think about making examples for our audience that are business development focused, because that's why everybody's here, that speech that you're trying to figure out all the content, what you might quote, and where you've got a PowerPoint here to quote there and an interview here, that project for a conference or that speech for a conference, developing a give to get everybody an investment you can make in a potential prospect that will create demand given your expertise, scaling that across your team, packaging it up. That's a project. Thinking about a lot of times in a certain part of the year, our business development teams will have a bit of a campaign. Hey, we've got a webinar coming up in November. We want to invite these 157 organizations. Well, there's a whole process that goes to that. It's time bound. And then, by the way, everybody's heard me say it. When you deliver the content, that's not the finish line. That's the starting line. How do we get it in front of 1,000 more people? And what's the list of theirs? And who's sending it out around to who and offer an introduction? So although those are time-bound things around business development that somebody could put in the projects folder and really lead that so they have everything in one place. Tiago, does that sound about right?
Couldn't have said it better myself. Beautifully said.
So let's go to areas. So this was a big unlock for me too, because these are the things that you sort of fall in love with, right? Those things in life that you're always working on. So give me examples of how that might fit in your life, and then we'll translate to business development.
I wouldn't say the things you fall in love with. That's more resources. Areas are more like responsibilities, which you may or may not love.
Oh,
This was an enormous unlock for me too. It actually, the distinction between projects and areas actually comes from the Getting Things Done methodology by David Allen. When I learned this, like the first month of my first professional job, or maybe like the second or third month, it just instantly clarified for me so many things. And the distinction is basically there's projects, these discrete events that begin and end, but not everything is a project in a
yeah.
business or in life. Many things, many very important things are areas of responsibility. They're things that they don't stop and start. They're ongoing. They're continuous. They're always happening to some degree in the background.
Yep.
And they're not as easy to identify as projects. It takes a little bit of time, but I mean, there's some obvious ones like your finances,
Yep.
right? Your finances are a critical area of life you definitely need to manage, but they're not a project. They're never going to check off your finances as finished. Things like your health, things like your family, things like your house, things like your relationships. These are ongoing concerns that don't have a beginning and end.
So translating back to BD, when we think of our audience, they've crystallized a list of relationships that are the most important to them. We call that a protomoy list. It's a Greek word, no direct English equivalent, but it basically means first among equals or first in order. Who are my people? Who are the folks, the top 10 or 20 people that I really want to invest in? That's an area. I think of areas are also, there's so many functional, deep technical experts. Well, there's areas of their functional expertise that are always learning about. Potentially, if they have to juggle several of those, could potentially be areas. Would those be more resources or areas? What do you think?
No, I actually love that example. This is an example for me too, is often you do a project with a client. That's a great way to start because it's bounded, right? You don't yet
Yep.
know if it's going to go well. And then you have
Yep.
a first initial project. If it goes well, and if you're both happy, and if it's something that you want to continue, I will often get what starts off as a little project folder. And I'll think, I really love this client. I'm gonna pitch them again. I'm gonna propose working together ongoingly. I'll just get that exact folder, which has all the data I need, all the calls
Yeah.
we've had, the context that I built, everything I've learned from working with them. And I'll just move it in one move to the areas.
I love it.
So now they just went from a one-time client to an ongoing client, which is
Yeah.
what you described.
I'm thinking of one of our just all-star clients. She was in one of our workshops 10 plus years ago, top litigator at a firm, but had a bunch of different disciplines. And I remember in the workshop, this is like 12 or 13 years ago, she said, you know what? I think there's going to be a trend around cybersecurity and the defense for large organizations against cyber attacks legally. And I want to lean into that. We're like, yes, that sounds like it's going to be a thing. Well, it's obvious it was a thing now, but it was not obvious at the time. Well, she started really building up an expertise in that, giving talks on it, things like that. I can visualize her shifting that project to an area. And now she's one of the top defense litigators, lawyers around cybersecurity attacks in the world because she got
Incredible.
into it early and made learning a big priority.
I love that story. And I wish more people understood that almost everyone that I talk to and just find out a bit about who they are, what they do, I just always think that they have the seed, at least the seed of what you just described, a fantastic, unique, incredibly fulfilling, and of course, wildly profitable career. That's all built on unique knowledge, personal, rare, hard-won knowledge. And that's the kind of knowledge that you put in your notes, right? Notes are informal, they're messy. You use the word database, but really it's just like text or maybe some images kind of just like loosely put in there. That's how personal experience starts. It's tacit. It's not easy to codify. And that's why it's so valuable is it can, with some development, you have to turn it into things, you have to develop it and build it. It can become the basis of an incredible competitive advantage.
Without a doubt. And again, I know I'm sounding like a fanboy here, audience, but I'm just going to do it. But like in my areas, the things I really care about that are ongoing are things like research on, we have a historical home that I'm in love with, and it's fun to go back and see who lived here and what happened. Travel, places we might want to go. Design. How can you ever end loving design? So I'll be somewhere and I'll just snap a photo and put it in a design folder, or even it might be in a magazine, I snap a photo. Investing, love it. Health. I've got everything around eating and drinking formulas to how I taper before an ultimate Frisbee national or world's championship. But I've documented those things and why in the world, in the old days, I'd figure it out every time. Now everything is documented with checklist and I can drop right into the thing I need when I need it. There's other stuff, camping and hiking spots that we love, board games, different scenarios, games we want to, and then running of the business. There's a bunch of things in the areas and they're like, there might be a project that like falls out of that. Hey, we're going to do a big backpacking trip in a certain area. That could be a project, but all of the knowledge of that camping and hiking area feels more like an area to me. Give me feedback. Like, is that on the right track or what do you think?
Perfect. So the distinction between projects and areas is whether it's time bound and whether there's an outcome, right?
Yep.
There's a different distinction between areas and resources, which is the distinction which is actually quite a sharp distinction if you think about it, between things you are responsible for and things you are merely interested in.
So responsible for is areas, interested in
Yes.
is resources.
Yes. And sometimes it can change. So like the camping example. Camping is something you just do a couple times a year, go to kind of the same campsites, and you want to just reference kind of the packing list or what you learned, what's the best campsite to get, when is it open and closed, these kinds of details. For most people, I think that would be a resource, right? It's just an interest. You have no ongoing responsibility to camp, right?
Yeah.
But now, this is an interesting thing, and this is why it's so important to be able to move things between the paracategories, is something could change in your life so small that suddenly changes what that camping information means to you. Let's say you sign up to be a Boy Scout leader for I don't know if you have any kids, but if you had your son's Boy Scout troop, you sign up to be the camping facilitator or something.
Yep.
In that instant, that your relationship to that information has changed. Now you're responsible because you're going to have a Boy Scout troop counting on you to make the camping successful.
This is super helpful. So back to the audience, using Tiago's definitions, everybody in our audience is a leader in some way or another. You're at least leading client teams and building a big book of business at minimum. But then many of our audience are leading people who are leading client teams. They might be leading a practice area, geography, everything's a matrix organization in the expertise world we're in. And then a lot of people are leading entire organizations on the audience. So I think using Tiago's definitions, you could think about what are the areas of life I'm really interested in? And what are the areas that I'm responsible for? And then you're moving things in the right way. That totally makes sense. I think I've been flipping area and responsibility, simply put, with a little nuance I can tweak. So tell us go deeper into resources then. So these are, you run with it.
Yeah, so resources is in a sense everything else. Some words that people find helpful are passions, right? You're not responsible, but it's a passion. Interests, things you're learning about, reading, researching. Curiosities, things you're not like actively going after new information about it, but when something arises, you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And the other way you can think about it is assets. So sometimes it's not exactly an interest, but for example, I have a resource folder with stock images, right? When I think, oh, I need a stock image for this slide or this website or whatever, I want to just go to a pre-made folder with images that I've already decided are cool and interesting and relevant, right?
Yep.
And so it's kind of a catch-all term, but I think the important thing is that it's like an other category. The important thing is that it can grow as big as you want. You should have as many interests and passions and curiosities as you can imagine, as long as on the condition that information is separate and a little bit out of sight, out of mind from what is in your projects and areas.
And the reason I was grinning from ear to ear a moment ago when you said assets is our audience knows that word. We use it in the context of capture things. And again, we didn't have building a second brain for the first 20 years that we've run in the company and teaching this, but audience will know this idea. Capture things that are interesting to you. You do not have to worry about where it's going to go, but that you might want to send someday to a client to when you hear the need that they're interested in the same thing at a long dinner, or they might be interested in maybe they got promoted and they want to have your synthesis of the book the first 90 days. Whatever it is, but things that are articles, anything at all that you find interesting, and keeping it in one place makes it so much easier to invest in that client. Shoot them a quick note, WhatsApp message, text, or whatever. Say, hey, thought of you. Here's an article, relates back to that dinner we had 2 months ago. Hope this is helpful. Hope we can catch up soon. I'll be in New York in a couple of weeks. I'll reach out. Those little, I'm still alive and I care and I'm thinking about you and I'm paying attention. Those little nudges are so important. And a lot of people get hung up on one, trying to set the bar too high, like it has to be some big life-changing thing. No. Or problem two is, I don't know what to send. Well, you've got to become a collector of assets to be able to easily send. So I know that's a little different application, Tiago, but the idea of having a database of things you find interesting to send to your clients to let them know you're thinking about them. Thoughts on that idea and using the para method? Yep.
It's a fantastic example. It's a perfect example. I've noticed myself, it is incredibly rare for people to follow up, just in general. Like if you just follow up, just do what you said you would do. If you said, oh, I'll send you an article, do it. If you said, oh, I'll introduce you to so-and-so, do that. It's like you instantly separate yourself from about 95% of people if you just do that. And I think everyone would agree they know this. But then why don't so many people do it? It's because it takes effort and it takes time that we don't have. So I love what you said. You got to make that easy. It's got to take seconds, a few minutes at most. I say you have a dinner with a client. I've done this many times before. And you say, and they describe a problem they're having. And you say, this book that I read would be really useful to you. I started to keep track. I would follow up and ask. I'd say the name of the book. I would even send them the Amazon link and make it very easy. I started to track what percentage of people actually went and checked out the book. It was like less than 5%, extremely low. Because obviously, who's going to go spend,
it's another
what does it take, 5 to 10 hours to read a book just because you casually mentioned it? No way. So what I started to do is take notes on the books that I read, right? Which can be completely automated, by the way. I use a service called Readwise where I make a highlight in an ebook and that passage gets automatically saved in my digital notes with no action required on my part.
Ooh, I like that.
It's incredibly powerful.
Yep.
And so what I started doing instead is saying, instead of, oh, you should go spend your time and effort to go find this book, I say, let me send you my notes.
Ooh.
Let me send you my
I think
notes.
it's brilliant.
And then I kept track of the completion rate of that, and it was like 90% plus.
Oh yeah. And the 10% that maybe they didn't even read it, you still got credit for sending it.
Yes.
Like it was still a win. It was just an even bigger win for the 90%. Yeah. And to build on what you said, I think you're exactly right that most people don't follow up. Now let's extrapolate out a little more. So I'm talking to the audience here. What I want you to do, audience, as you think about this system is when you're at that dinner with Suzanne, you hear what the priority is. Yes, you send your notes afterwards or whatever your follow-up is. But imagine the power of the relationship advantage you build if 2 months after that, you send something new, but still aligned with the problem. Hey, still thinking about you, ran across this amazing study we did a couple weeks ago at our firm, thought you'd love it, want to shoot over. Check out the chart on page 5 if you don't have much time. I did your homework for you because that is really game-changing. Be happy to have a call to talk about it if you're interested. So it's not just a follow-up one time. I want to make it super clear to the audience. It's in the multiple follow-ups that you'll really separate yourself. The first time separates yourself. By the third time, nobody's left but you. And I just think having a system like Tiago's is what will enable that. Would you mind just sharing at least maybe a couple ideas of the apps people might use? Because there's just an abundance of choices. I guarantee 99% of people are driving down the highway. They're like, I want to do this, but what do I do next?
We have a community of very fanaticals. We call them second brainers, people who have taken our course, read the book, are really interested in this. We survey them occasionally, and they're using in total over 50 different apps, which I mentioned to demonstrate that these principles are completely platform agnostic. You're never going to be stuck or imprisoned in any one platform. They can be used really on any software and even beyond software, like on paper if you wanted. I would say those are Evernote, which is what I've used for the last 10 years. Increasingly though, Notion is really taking off. Third, for more kind of specialized, and I would say in some ways sophisticated use cases, there's a whole new category of note-taking apps called graph-based or linked note-taking apps. The two most prominent examples are Obsidian, and the other one is Roam Research, which was kind of the pioneer that invented a lot of this new category. The way that most people choose apps is almost random. It's like what their friend is using, what seems popular, what they saw on social media, which icon they liked. This is an important decision. You're creating a long-term knowledge repository that you're going to pour a lot of value into. And so what we started to realize is you should choose your note-taking app, your second brain app, based on your thinking style. based on how your mind works. Looking at a lot of different models and a lot of trial and error, we've sort of discovered and validated that there's kind of 4 groups when it comes to this. There are architects. These are people who like a top-down view. They like to see the big picture. They think a lot about structure and a lot about kind of how everything fits together. The opposite of architects are gardeners. Some people just like to try things and just jump into action and just let things emerge and just see what happens. They're very bottom up. Then there's librarians, which are people who are more like organization-centric. They want to kind of just have almost like a neat library of knowledge where they can go in and say, okay, let me take this title off the shelf. Let me take that book off the shelf, except in the digital realm. And then there's students, which are, if none of the previously resonated with you, or if you're not sure which one resonated with you, or if you're just getting started and this is all too complicated, then you're a student. It's like the catch-all, the beginner one. And students often are just using notes in more limited, very specific ways to accomplish one thing they're trying to do, such as pass a class, graduate from college. You don't have to be a student. It could be just one project at your job or one aspect of your personal life. So these different archetypes correspond to different note-taking apps. If you're an architect, you should go with something like Notion or Craft.
Yep.
If you are a gardener, you should go with Roam Research, Obsidian, or Logseq. If you are a librarian, you should go with Evernote or Microsoft OneNote. And if you are a student, you should go with kind of just like the default built-in note-taking apps like Apple Notes or Google Keep, or if you have an Android phone, you might have one built in. Those are kind of the guidelines that I offer.
If you'd like to learn how to transfer the note-taking skills you learned in this podcast and apply them to growing in your business development career, the video you're seeing here on the screen is the place to go next. I think you're going to love it. Thanks for listening, and talk more soon.